From KCBS Radio in San Francisco, I'm Matt Pitman, and this is Bay Current for Tuesday, January 18th. During this Omicron surge of the COVID pandemic, testing has once again become sort of a flashpoint. With the highly contagious nature of Omicron and the ever-changing guidance about when to test, how frequently, even how urgently, and then, of course, there's the issue of supply and demand. My KCBS radio colleague Keith Menconi has been covering testing and the accompanying challenges. Starting tomorrow on Wednesday, that's when the federal government's website opens up to have a home testing kit sent to you free of charge. But that still, I think, doesn't quite crystallize the best practices around when to test, how frequently to test, if you even should be testing. So you spoke with a friend of KCBS Radio, certainly a friend of Bay Current podcast, Dr. Peter Chin Hong at UCSF, and got a little bit more on testing and using tests as a screening tool. What did Dr. PCH have to say about testing as it stands today with everything that we know about Omicron and the shortage of testing?
Notorious PCH. Let's see if we can make that stick.
I think it's sticking. He really likes the acronym. We talked about that. He likes it. So we'll keep it going.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This has been a huge point of confusion, and especially just the amount of emphasis that has been put on the message of you should get tested as a screening tool before you go to any sort of meetup or gathering, especially gatherings that involve high-risk individuals, people that aren't vaccinated, people that are immune compromised. That was a big message, especially before Thanksgiving, where we were hearing, if you are going to meet up with your family for Thanksgiving, you should get that rapid test right when you get there, and that will give you a snapshot of your current infectivity. It's possible that you will be infected at that moment and that the test will miss it, but the test will at least tell you whether or not your infection has progressed to such a degree that you could infect anybody else at that gathering. That's what we were being told in November, and I personally took a lot of comfort in that because I have a niece who is too young to get vaccinated yet, and I don't want to be the uncle who gets my niece sick, so I was following that advice religiously. But you skip ahead a little bit into the Omicron surge, and we start getting these concerning reports, concerning studies that are suggesting that the at-home rapid tests are not doing as good a job of picking up the Omicron infection. And the picture that is starting to crystallize is that essentially you are going to have a few days, maybe 2, maybe 3, where you will not only be infected, but also infectious, and the at-home rapid tests won't pick it up. And so that was all very concerning. And made me wonder, so what is the point of even using these tests if you're going to have that window where potentially you could infect other people? Doesn't that make these tests kind of useless? And so I put that question to Dr. Peter Chin Hong, and what he said was there's no such thing as reducing your risk to zero. So any amount of risk reduction is a good thing. So it's let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. These tests still are going to catch an awful lot of infections, so they're still worth doing. And if you're concerned about that window of time, what you can do is button up in the days before you're going to have that meeting so that you can at least know when you test on the day of that meeting, the day of that family gathering, you can be pretty certain that whatever infection you would have had would have progressed to the point by then of being detectable by the test. So basically, I don't know how well that comes across without pictures and diagrams, but what I'm trying to say is if you're having that meetup on Saturday, be very careful for at least Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so that let's say you potentially got infected Tuesday. Well, that's probably going to show up in your test when you get that test on Saturday. Whereas if you weren't careful and you got infected on, say, Thursday, there's a chance that you would be infectious by Saturday and it wouldn't be caught. So that's the latest, greatest advice from Dr. Peter Chin-Hong, and that's what I'm going to be living my life by for the foreseeable future.
And understandably so, there is a little bit of, a question about the efficacy of these tests, especially with Omicron. Can they detect Omicron, as you mentioned, early enough? Omicron being much more contagious, but less virulent. So you may not be symptomatic as you're getting ready to go to a family gathering on a Saturday. So you may not think to do the things like take your temperature or the other steps for, closely monitoring your own symptoms of potential, COVID infection. And so has Omicron and the introduction of this latest variant into the COVID atmosphere impacted anything in terms of the effectiveness of these tests, or any guidance from medical professionals about how to approach testing with Omicron now the predominant variant that we're dealing with?
Well, that's kind of the debate right now, is just how much sensitivity have we lost as a result from Omicron. And it seems like there's a few things that might be going on to contribute to this loss in sensitivity. One thing that's been suggested is that it's not that the test is actually any worse at detecting Omicron. It's just that because Omicron is so much more infectious, it takes less virus for an Omicron infected person to transmit to another person. So basically, you're at a level of viral. Your virus load is at a lower level, so low that the test won't detect it. But because it's Omicron and it's so infectious, it's enough to infect other people. So that's kind of one of the complicated factors that are going into how well these tests are working. And the general consensus seems to be from doctors, much like Dr. Peter Chin-Hong said, these tests still have a valuable role to play, but we shouldn't be putting our full faith in them. If all the other steps that one might take to keep friends and family safe, still important. You still want to, if you can, isolate as much as you can before you're going to have a high-risk meeting. You still want to, if you're meeting a really high-risk person, probably mask up, wash your hands, keep some social distance, and just in general in your life, get that three-shot mix. So all those things remain important. I think that the way to look at the tests is just one additional tool, one additional safety tool that should be a part of a broader arsenal.
Now let's switch from the in-home and rapid tests to the conventional PCR test. You have another story that you've worked on about Santa Clara County health officials and what they're trying to do to, it sounds like, limit the burden on hospitals and on clinics, and even, the larger testing sites, because a lot of folks don't want to deal with the in-home or the rapid test. They want to go get the PCR test, the much more effective test. But there is a tremendous strain right now, obviously, on our healthcare systems. And what is Santa Clara County saying about what they're advising people to do for folks that either are symptomatic and want the better test, the PCR test, or just don't trust the in-home rapid test?
It was a surprisingly blunt message that we got from Santa Clara County Health Officer Dr. Sarah Cody, essentially saying, right now, there simply are not enough tests to go around. There's not enough lab testing capacity for those PCR tests, and there are not enough rapid tests to distribute to people to use at home. So however you slice it or dice it, we need to be smart about how we use these tests, who uses these tests, and when they use them. So essentially, she held a press conference late last week that was aimed at putting down some rules of the road to let people know when does it make sense to get a PCR test, when does it not make sense to get a PCR test. I think essentially they're, like you said, trying to take some pressure off of the system and making sure that these tests are used in the smartest way possible.
So who should go get a PCR test and who should look at alternatives?
the general guidelines are going to be basically what you expect. If you have had if you're experiencing symptoms, you should go get a PCR test, and if you have had an exposure, you should go get a PCR test. Dr. Cody points out that the PCR tests are more sensitive in general. They will do a better job of picking up an infection, but she says the rapid at-home tests work as well, so you shouldn't shy away from those. As a quick side note, most of those are shipped with 2 tests inside, and that actually does increase the sensitivity. If you take the one test on one day and then you wait at least a day and a half to take the second test, that is going to increase the sensitivity to near PCR levels, so that's the recommended way to use them. Although, with the testing scarcity, you kind of have to weigh that, what your particular needs are.
I think that's important too, because you get the kit that has the 2 tests in it. You get that, you get a positive and you're convinced that you don't have it. A lot of folks, will want to, I've known people, frankly, that take 2 of them back to back because they're convinced that the first one's going to be a false positive or a false negative. But so it sounds like definitely wait at least a full day between taking that second in-home test before confirming.
Right. And the reason for that is because the infection, you're going to have different viral loads throughout the course of your infection.
Right.
And so if you are infected and it missed it on the first day that you tested, probably why that happened is you simply hadn't developed enough virus in your body yet for it to be detectable. But you wait another day and a half, you're probably going to be on another day where you're more infectious, you're dropping more virus out of your system, and it will detect that. So you really want that window of time before you can say with a little bit more certainty, okay, I know over this whole period I wasn't having enough virus, therefore I'm probably not infected. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is all of these are just a snapshot for one day, and the picture does change from day to day. The big thing that I think the county is trying to discourage people from doing is to, once you have that negative at-home test, they don't want you to go to a testing site and confirm it with a PCR test. Their message is, if you get the at-home positive, consider yourself positive. That's done. You can, especially if you got symptoms, you should just assume you have COVID. You should isolate. You should follow all the guidelines. That is good enough. You don't need to confirm that with a PCR test. That's going to waste a test, and that's also going to bring you out of the house and potentially into positions where you could infect other people. So they're really trying to discourage that. They're also trying to discourage people from getting a PCR test at 90 days, anywhere within 90 days after you have tested positive for COVID, had a COVID infection. And the reason for that is the PCR tests are very sensitive, and they are going to detect viral fragments for a very long time after your initial infection took place. So even if you have not been reinfected, it might still pick up your initial infection, and so you'll get a positive test even though it's really just the remnants of this old COVID infection that you had that probably isn't even active anymore. They might just be non-moving virus particles.
Interesting.
So that's another instance where they don't want you to waste that test and also waste the anxiety of getting that false positive. And then finally, the other big thing that they're really trying to discourage, and we've reported on this as well, hospitals throughout the Bay Area also trying to discourage this. Don't go to the emergency room to get a COVID test. It's putting a strain on emergency rooms throughout the Bay Area. Basically, people with very mild COVID infections showing up, they just want that peace of mind. It's understandable. You feel lousy. You want to get some certification verifying that what you're feeling really is COVID. And so, natural to just think, I should go to the hospital and get this checked out. But if it is that mild infection, for the most part, you don't need treatment. You just need to isolate at home, rest, drink water, and you're not going to get any additional treatment by going there. And it is putting a strain on ERs that have so many other things to worry about at this moment. So the message from the ER, from hospitals and from the county at this point is, don't go to the ER to get tests. That's not what it's for.
So basically, if I had to put a bow on everything that we've talked about, Keith, the message is be patient. Patience. And this has been the message that we've been dealing with for over 2 years now with this pandemic, and patience in terms of, getting the in-home and the rapid tests, that if you get a positive that you're not convinced is a positive, or a negative that you're convinced is not a negative, don't immediately take another test. Wait at least another day before taking that second in-home test. And then when it comes to getting a PCR test, be patient enough to where you're not going to an ER, or you're not getting a test out of an abundance of caution. Only get a test if you have had a contact or if you have specific COVID symptoms, and don't go to the ER. Try and get it through your medical provider or through a testing site. So, again, we're dealing with this message of be patient during this pandemic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, what patience looks like for a lot of people at this moment is quietly isolating or quarantining at home.
Yeah.
And if you do have those symptoms, you do have to assume, whether you have a positive test or not, that it's COVID, and you need to follow the procedures that are recommended, which is basically stay in your room, try to stay away from even your housemates as much as you can, and just, lock down as much as possible. And that is frustrating, and it's understandable why somebody would want that extra layer of verification. But, at this point, with resources stretched this thin, you kind of just have to assume when you have those symptoms that it is likely an Omicron infection. Although they are also, health officials also quick to say, if you do have more concerning symptoms, trouble breathing, heart problems, chest pain, that is the time to go to the ER. So definitely pay attention to those symptoms.
Keith Menconi, we appreciate it very much. Thanks for giving us a few minutes of your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thanks again to my colleague Keith Menconi. And you can always stay up to date on the latest on Omicron, on COVID, and impacts felt around the Bay Area on our website at kcbsradio.com. And new episodes of the Bay Current podcast are out every day. We'd love to be part of your daily routine. So please subscribe to Bay Current on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And each episode is on the KCBS Radio YouTube page. There's a link in our show notes. That's it for today's Bay Current. I'm Matt Pitman. We'll chat with you again tomorrow.